Good afternoon. Uh, this is a little later in the day than I would normally publish, but I'm trying something new. And as always, the technology slipped me a curve. So we won't normally be here at this hour of the day, but I'm going to go for something a little earlier, but Nick screwed up the scheduling. So we will just do the best we can because we're ADHD parents. And that's what we're used to doing, right? Okay, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. I'm a clinical psychologist and the parent of an ADHD adult, and the relative of numerous ADHDers, um, including very possibly my wife, which is not fully confirmed, but seems pretty good chance. Anyway, so this is, I always talk about this show as being trying to make the world safe for ADHDers, because frankly, the whole system gives ADHDers, well, a lot of trouble, shall we say. It is not designed for atypical brains. It is not designed for the ADHD brain. It is designed for neurotypical brains who will end up sitting in cubicles their entire life. And that's the way the system has been set up. And we start off by asking a hyperactive ADHDer to go to school, and in the first grade, of course, now we're asking them to go before the first grade, but I dropped out of kindergarten, so I don't have a lot of sympathy for that. But anyway, and they're asked to sit quietly, keep their hands to themselves, don't talk, don't notice the fascinating curl in the little girl's hair in front of you. Don't do any of that stuff. Sit quietly, pay attention, don't create a ruckus, all that other stuff. Now, for a neurotypical brain, that's doable. For an ADHD brain, that is torture. And that's where the pain and the problems start. Because ADHD looks like a behavior problem. It looks like just a kid who's out of control. He just messing with this. But research, since in the interim, since my son was born, and his current age, the research has confirmed that ADHD is a neurologic condition. It is characterized by either the overmetabolism or the underproduction of several neurotransmitters in the brain, principally dopamine, we think, but norepinephrine is also a possibility. Now, if you don't know what any of that meant, let me tell you. Okay, the brain, your nervous system, from your brain all, down your spinal cord out to all your different limbs and all that stuff. That system is an electrochemical system, okay? And you have nerves, and when the signal is inside a nerve, it's electrical. But when one nerve needs to communicate with the other, this is something you may have heard of called a synapse. That's where two nerves meet or more. Anyway, and then what you have to do is it becomes a chemical transmission of the signal, and that's done by neurotransmitters. So if the signal is coming from the direction of my elbow, and this is the other nerve, in this little cleft here in between is where this side secretes the neurotransmitter and this side picks it up. And this signal continues on. And it happens, in a flash, of course. That also controls the way we feel and all that sort of thing. So we know that ADHDers, most of the time, their misbehaviors is two situations. Basically, when they are uncomfortable because they have to do something sit still, say, that is hard for them to do, or they're asked to do something that seems to them to be impossible for them to do. An example is memory has multiple levels, okay? Up at the tippity top is a thing called working memory. Okay, working memory is when, like, the boss asks you to go to such and such a place and do 2 or 3 things. Okay, you don't write anything down, you just remember it. That's working memory. And then when you hit middle age, all of a sudden you get up from the family room and you go to the bedroom and you can't remember why you're there. That's a failure of working memory. And for ADHDers, working memory is a problem since they don't got much. Okay, so I'm still a psychologist, neuropsychologist, still see some patients, but I can remember tons of cases where a frustrated mother is telling me, I just told him, to go pick up his clothes, put away the laundry, and clean off his desk. And I got up there and all he did was put away his clothes and he's sitting there playing video games. And he doesn't understand why I'm mad. But he doesn't understand why he's mad because his working memory is poor and he totally forgot that there were 2 other things that you asked him to do in addition to the one he actually did. Okay, and this causes all sorts of trouble. Okay, this causes problems in learning because when you learn, what happens is that the new information, say you just listen to the teacher talk about something, the new information is in working memory. And then what your brain does is pretty fast is screen through the old memories. It's stored way in the back of the brain for matches, for things that are close. So, sort of like if, back in the old days when we used file cabinets, if your administrative assistant is looking through for the file that she wants to put a new piece of information in, hey, but the thing that happens is by the time your young ADHD person has found the part in the long-term memory, the file cabinet, if you will, or the file folder where this information is supposed to go, the working memory part has totally forgotten what the information was. So at this point, we got a choice. We either ask a question and look dumb in class, or we sit there quietly and try to fake it. If we try to fake it, it just means we never got that information. So it might as well not have happened. Okay, and this is, a constant problem for these kiddos. That's why school is somewhat less than ideal situation for them, because it's really based on having people who have intact working memory and a fierce desire to pay attention, which your ADHD is going to have troubles with that one. And now these are all neurologic, okay? ADHD is a genetic condition, okay? What I mean by that is if 2 people have a child and the child has ADHD, one side of the family or the other, and very possibly both sides, have ADHD. There's a thing called heritability index, which measures the likelihood that a particular genetic condition is passed down. And for ADHD, it's 85%, which is incredibly high. When I was doing a lot of private practice, I'd have people come in. They'd have one kid that was been identified for the teacher, and oh God, you got to get this kid tested, and da 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 da. And I would either the family knew or they didn't know, and I'd test the kid. The kid's got ADHD. Then the next thing I know, I'm testing brothers and sisters, and usually dad. Okay, I remember one family I was doing a debrief. I was talking to the parents and telling them what we found in testing. And the whole time I was doing it, the wife kept elbowing the husband. And she's saying, "That's just like you. That's just like you. You do that all the time." So eventually I tested the father, and sure enough, he had ADHD, no doubt about it. But that's the way it works. So it's not that your kid is trying to be bad. It's one of your genes is causing difficulties, and he doesn't know how to handle it. I mean, it's sort of laughable, but if it weren't so tragic. Okay, and the thing that bothers me about it particularly is that these kids get treated like they're being bad, like they're choosing, you know. I mean, I have heard frustrated parents and teachers, "He's going to end up in jail. He's going to be a criminal." No, ma'am. No, ma'am. And the other thing is, your average ADHD kid, this is research, God's truth, gets 70 critical comments a day. Now you think about that. 70 times the big people in your life are telling you you're doing something wrong. Think about what that does to the way you feel about yourself, your self-esteem, if you will, your self-worth. It's not the way to build people who are real confident and sure of themselves. And yet, we find a ton of extremely successful people in the world who have ADHD. Steve Jobs, just it could go on and on. The reason they're so successful is because they are really good at creative thinking. They are not real good at routine stuff, balance the books, look at all the numbers, No. But how do you solve this problem? They are dynamite at that. Okay. And that's why we need them. That's why we can't get rid of all the ADHD, because it would hurt us. Speaking as one whose brain is reasonably neurotypical, but the thing that's so frustrating to me, and I've been doing this psychology thing for over 40 years now, and I get really sick of having to work with people who don't know what they're talking about, but somehow are in a position of authority. That includes a lot of teachers, well, mostly principals. The teachers are usually better. Matter of fact, a lot of the teachers have ADHD and they have children with ADHD, so they know what the game is about. But for some reason, the administrative types are not free thinkers, shall we say. And, order at all costs. So you get ADHD kids, and, what do? We ask them to sit still. They're hyperactive. They can't sit still. You ask them to be quiet. Again, they're hyperactive. They can't be quiet. And again, there are issues like that. And they're getting criticized continuously. So what do you think people do, or anybody does, when they're criticized continuously? They just quit paying attention even more. So you've got a kiddo who really can't help himself. This is just one thing after another that he has to put up with, or she. Little girls tend to not be quite as active as little boys, so they get into less trouble, but they still got problems with this stuff. They just kind of sit quietly and daydream while little boys tip over furniture and stuff. Again, it is a huge problem. It causes these kids a lot of troubles, a lot of insecurity. a lot of low self-esteem. I mean, I see adults too, and the ones that I feel the sorriest for are the ones who are like 30 years old, have never been diagnosed, or have been diagnosed, but the parents didn't want to do the treatment, so they never got any real help. And now they're 30 years old and they have a huge record of failure, of being fired, of not being able to keep a job, and they have also have problems with the relationships. Uh, they're a little trickier to be with than neurotypical folks, and so a lot of times they just have no self-esteem, none at all. They just have been beaten down by the system, and they're not fun people. Actually, they usually are, because ADHDers pretty much always have a good sense of humor. But some of them are incredibly depressed. Some of them are incredibly anxious. Some of them are both. They just kind of take turns. And it's all as a result of the way the system's set up. If we had a different system, we probably wouldn't be so worried about ADHD. But ADHDers don't fit our system. They just don't. But we still need them. Okay, neurotypical people are good at maintaining the system just the way it is. They are not so good at seeing problems and making big changes. So that's a huge issue, and it is one that causes us a lot of difficulties. We get these people who are in charge who haven't had a creative thought in 30 years, if one then. But they're the kind of folks who, slide right through the system and do pretty well. Okay, now what does all this mean? My kid's not a bad kid. My kid's not a behavior problem. My kid's got a neurologic condition. What does that mean exactly? What do I do? Well, there's a bunch of stuff you got to do. But the main one I wanted to talk about today is the holding yourself back and not responding while you try to figure out, is what I'm seeing and hearing ADHD? Or just the usual not paying it, not almost said it, the usual, trying things out kind of kid behavior. And you really need to know that. And it's hard, it's tricky to find out. It's tricky to tell. Okay? But if you say, and any of us who've had an ADHD child have said this, just get back in there and do your homework. Don't make such a big deal out of it. Let's go. Or words to that effect, delivered in a more or less controlled voice, or maybe not so controlled. You have to understand that, like, not too long ago, and even in my day, spare the rod and spoil the child was not unheard of. Okay. My kids, it never came to that, but there were times, let's put it that way. But once you do that, you've lost the upper hand, and especially nowadays, it's hard to get that back.